Welcome back to History with Tim. Today we're diving into Tiermaker rankings of the most important wars in American history. From the revolution that sparked a nation to global conflicts that shaped the modern world, we're placing these pivotal wars on a tier list based on their impact on the country and the world. Which wars changed the course of American history and which had lasting effects on the nation's identity, politics, and global standing? We'll explore each significant conflict, outcomes, and long-term impact as we decide which belongs in S tier and which might rank lower. The tier list on the screen with the cursor hovering over the first war to be ranked. Now, remember, this is all good fun. Let me know in the comments where you think these wars should be ranked, because history is all about discussion. So without further ado, let's jump in and start ranking these American wars. So we're going to start, obviously, with the American Revolution. Now, this one's not really. I mean, the American Revolution. What we're gonna do is, once I put it, I'm going to read off some facts, and then we're going to move to the next one. So, obviously, the American Revolution period starts in 1765. A bunch of different things start the revolution. You have, of course, all the different acts, what became known as the Intolerable Acts, coming out of the British Empire, the quartering of troops in Boston, and, of course, Boston Massacre, Boston Tea Party. All this culminates into the shot heard around the world at Lexington and Concord. Now, obviously, this is going to be S tier because we wouldn't exist without this war. So it's definitely one of the more important wars out there. The next one's kind of interesting, but before we get into that, pretty much the outcome of the war is we won, but it was kind of a stalemate. Now, hear me out when I explain this to you. What it really was the British were not willing to fight anymore. It was becoming more economically devastating to duke it out with us, especially with France and Spain entering the war and us being backed by the Dutch Republic. So pretty much what you have happen is we meet in Paris with the British and we make the Treaty of Paris. John Adams, Ben Franklin, John Hay, and the British delegation, they sit there, they meet, they discuss what's going to happen, and they make it grueling, but the United States is now an independent nation under the Articles of Confederation. Now, again, this is about war, not periods. The Constitutional Convention era is probably the most important period in American history, followed very closely with the Reconstruction period. But with that said, that's definitely up there. Next is going to be the War of 1812. War of 1812. See, I'm going to put it at a C tier. Now, hear me out when I say this. Now, they look at the War of 1812 as kind of a part. We look at it as its own separate thing. War of 1812 starts June 18th, 1812, ends February 17th. February, yeah, I said that. 1815. What pretty much causes it is the British are at war with France. We're kind of Madison. He wants to stay away from the war, but also the British are kind of overstepping themselves, getting in, doing things they really shouldn't be doing that break the Treaty of Paris, that break our mercantile agreements with them. So we decide we're going to declare war and we invade Canada. The Canadians actually successfully push us back, and the war ends inconclusive, and really nothing changes. The Canadian boundary stays the same. Spain does take control of West Florida, and we do defeat Tecumseh's Native American or Indian Confederacy. So I put it at C tier because it doesn't really stop anything or hinder anything. Pretty much, we were a neutral country and we were kind of just minding our own business at this point. So by doing that, doesn't really do much. Now, I'm going to go with this is supposed to be the Indian Wars mixed with, I guess, the move west. I'm going to put it at A tier because this is actually where you see the expansion. This is Manifest Destiny. This is where you see us moving across the continent, heading towards the Pacific. It kind of looks like Davy Crockett, but that looks like a river. So I'm guessing that's the Native Americans. What's really hard, though, about doing the American Indian Wars is it's hard to say where they start and where they end. They start, you could debatably say, in 1492 when Columbus lands in the Caribbean, and they go all the way until the 1880s, pretty much, when the last tribe finally gives up and goes to the reservations. So it's very hard to define it, but I would think that is a very defining moment, not only in American history, but Native American history, which is American history. I think that, it was a very savage war, what happened between both sides. And you could debatably say, you got the Seminole War in there. You have everything that happened in the plains after the American Civil War. You even have the incident when John Sullivan leads a cavalry army into the Iroquois Nation in upstate New York because the Iroquois were supporting England. So they were sent up there and they pretty much wiped out the Iroquois. They didn't obviously wipe them out, but they caused a lot of damage. So I'm gonna put them up there. See, now this is interesting because this actually isn't an American war, but I'm actually going to put this up to S tier. This is technically a Texas war. The Texas Revolution, it's this period, which, again, I'm going to be doing this as I probably should just set this up, but I didn't actually see everything. So the Texas Revolution starts on October 2nd, 1835, and it ends in 1836 with the Texan victory, and it establishes the nation of the Republic of Texas. What happened is Texas was kind of offered to settlers. It was this giant wasteland pretty much north of Mexico, like mainland Mexico. And what you have is the Mexican government's invited all of these people to move into this territory and start developing the land. But then you have a certain person come to power in Mexico named Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, who will declare himself president for life and dictator of Mexico, and he begins to rescind a lot of these laws, and the Texans don't like it. They're against it. And the Texans, as in the American Texans, and the Tejanos, which are Mexicans who live in the Texan territory, who sided with the Texans, they rise up against Santa Anna. And this culminates in the Battle of the Alamo, where you'll see people like Davy Crockett, Travis, and Jim Bowie all killed. It's a terrible defeat, crushing defeat. But what it does is it inspires them. Because if you notice, the war is only 6 months. The war ends at the Battle of San Jacinto when Sam Houston leads a beautiful, calculated attack. He somehow is able to trick Santa Anna to split his army in half, and Houston attacks the weaker army. And in the battle, Santa Anna is actually is captured and sent to actually here to the United States, where Andrew Jackson and him meet. But the Texas territory is officially given over to the Texans. Now, why is this so important and impactful for the United States? If this war doesn't happen, we don't get Texas. At least we don't get Texas as soon as we do. Because pretty much what happens is after Texas becomes its own country, it will then, in 1845, apply for statehood and become a state in the country. It'll be annexed, and that will be where we have two big events come from. One, we have the expansion of slavery into the South. So Texas becomes a state in the United States, but is south of the Mason-Dixon line. Mason and Dixon define the line north or free states, south or slave states. So with the annexation of Texas, that now adds another state to the slave states. So that's number one. Number two, Mexico does not actually really agree on what the border is. They say it's inland, more towards the American border. The Texans and Americans, though, say it's at the Rio Grande River. So what you're going to see in the years after the annexation in the 1840s, you're going to see American encampments and fortresses and things under the command of future President Zachary Taylor building up. And that will lead us to our next war. And that's the Mexican-American War. And I'm actually going to put that at A. Now, again, why do I put that below the Texas War? Now, let's get into this, because the Mexican-American War is a very important period. It's a war that starts April 25th, 1846, and it ends February 2nd, 1848. Now, like I said, it starts because you have this situation where you have Mexican soldiers stationed past the Rio Grande because Mexico claims that territory, and you have federal troops in the same side, U.S. federal troops in the same area. The Mexican government says, this is our land. The U.S. government says, nope, this is our land. Now, Manifest Destiny, and you're going to hear me say that a lot, because these early wars are very much about Manifest Destiny. Oh, I just realized that's not the Revolution. That's the Barbary War. We'll get back to that. Sorry. I was looking at it. But so, just gonna put that there. It was a stupid war. We shouldn't have been involved. But so pretty much, what happens is James Polk, who's a protege to Andrew Jackson. A lot of people look at Andrew Jackson and say he kind of is the one who starts this push westwards. He's the Manifest Destiny president, and James Polk is his protege. Now, actually, on April 25th, Polk is going to Congress. He is going there, and he's going to make a speech, and he is going to say, this is American territory and Mexican troops are occupying it. We have no other option but declare war. What happens on April 25th? Mexican troops fire on U.S. soldiers in the territory of the disputed land. 5 U.S. soldiers are killed. Zachary Taylor sends a telegraph, which I don't have the exact words, but the sum of it is, now is the time to get the ball rolling. And the invasion of Mexico begins. Now he goes to Congress, and instead of saying there's Mexican troops on U.S. territory, he says American blood has been shed on American territory. There is only one man who speaks out against this. He is a representative from Illinois, and it's Abraham Lincoln. He calls out Polk, and by doing this, pretty much tanks his career in Congress, and he loses his re-election. But this leads to the war. Zachary Taylor will be in command of the army for a period, and then Polk will name Winfield Scott the new commander. Scott will lead a daring invasion of Veracruz, which he will march from Veracruz to Mexico City and beat the Mexican army. The war itself will be 1 year, 9 months, and 1 week and a day. And it will end, and this is why I put it at A tier. It ends with the United States and Mexico signing the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and by doing that, it causes the Mexican secession, which in the Mexican secession, we gain California, Texas, New Mexico, Utah, Nevada, Arizona, and parts of Colorado, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Wyoming. We, of course, we did actually pay too. So, yes, we did beat them in the war, but we paid $15 million for the land. And this pretty much caps off Manifest Destiny. Now we control the California coast all the way to the Atlantic. And now there's all this territory in the middle. So this is very consequential. But again, just like the Texas Revolution, this war will now lead to the American Civil War. And that I am going to put at S tier. Now, the American Civil War obviously starts in April of 1865, and 61, ends in April of 1865. Ironically, the first field battle of the war is at Manassas, Virginia, or better known as Bull Run. It's fought actually near the property of a man named McLean. The war will actually end in McLean's parlor. Famous quote from the war. You guys know I'm specifying the American Civil War. Quote of the war is, "The war started in his backyard and it ended in his front parlor." But he moved to Appomattox after Manassas to get away from the war, and then it came to him anyway. But this will be the make or break moment for the United States. A lot of people say when the Constitution was created and the Declaration of Independence was created, we left out the biggest question. How are we to be a country that speaks about freedom and liberty and all these things, yet we have half of the country with people in bondage? Now, the war originally does not start that way. The war starts as just a way to keep the Union together. Lincoln himself will say early in the war, "I will accept the South back with all their slaves in chains." But in 1862, and it becomes official in 63, Lincoln signs the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing slaves in the slave states. I mean, in the states in rebellion. So this is a big distinction I always try to make when I'm doing these kind of videos talking about this subject. The slave states and the states in rebellion are completely different. Delaware had slaves. Maryland had slaves. Tennessee had slaves. Missouri had slaves. These 4 states, West Virginia, had slaves. These 5 states were all still in the Union. So what happens pretty much is those states keep slaves, but the states in rebellion technically are not supposed to have it. Slavery will not actually be abolished until 64 with the passing of the 13th Amendment, and it won't actually be codified until after the war when each state has to codify it, because that's part of the United States amendment process. Congress cannot just approve an amendment. They need 2/3 of the state to also approve it. But the war cost millions of American lives, and it's one of our most defining moments. And some say it actually caused international, because the countries of the world in 1865, the Second Schleswig War began. And England kind of had a duty to defend Denmark because the Danish royal family was married into the British royal family. But they saw how bad the war in America was, and they were like, we don't want to have one of these on a grander scale than just the Prussians and Austrians fighting the Danish. So we're going to leave it alone. So that's why you're going to see in this era, Bismarck kind of ran free because the powers of Europe really did not want a big war. So like the Italian War of Unification, yeah, the French come in on the Italian side, but no one else does. The Austro-Prussian War, no one comes in, it's just Austria versus Prussia. Even the Crimea War, which takes place later, no one wants to get involved because no one wants the destruction that the American Civil War was. Europe watched. They had people in the United States watching the war, and it terrified them what they saw. All right, what's up next? Spanish-American War. I hate to do this. I hate to do this because my boy, our boy from the show, our boy on this channel, Theodore Roosevelt, was a colonel in the Spanish-American War. But I sadly have to. The Spanish-American War is fought from April 12th, 1898 until July 17th, 1898. It's a 2-month war. Pretty much what happens is we have 2 fronts. We fight in Cuba and Puerto Rico and Guam and the Philippines. So the Caribbean and the Philippine Sea. Spain is a empire in decline at this point. It's been for a while, but it's kind of rushing. And we are kind of at this point that we're trying to make ourselves more of a power in the world. McKinley himself is trying to show the United States, this is the Gilded Age. He took us out of the panic of the late 1800s, and America's prospering. He wants us to be seen as a world power. So, an accident happens in Havana Harbor that we say was an attack, and we end up using it to our advantage, and we beat the Spanish Empire, an empire, in 2 months. And this is pretty much what people refer to as the beginning of the American imperial age. This is when we become the American empire, because we seized Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and Philippines. Puerto Rico, Guam, and even the Philippines, I believe to this day, do still hide, well, not hide, they still live under the umbrella of the American protection of the Treaty of Paris of 1898. But I'm going to put it at B tier because it was subsequential and it was important, but at the same time, it kind of just made us an imperial force. And again, this is just my opinion. These aren't what they should be. This is just what I think it should be. Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna be putting World War One there. Now I know everyone's probably saying, "Are you kidding me? How can you put World War One at a C tier?" Hear me out. Hear me out. World War One's fought July 1914, ends in November of 1918. It ends on the 11th day of the 11th month on the 11th hour. World War One was a European war. It was the Great War. Now, yes, Africa was involved, Asia was involved to an extent, but they were involved because of the European powers. The Japanese were fighting German colonies in Asia. Um, the Russians were fighting Ottomans in the steppes. Like it was a war that was mainly European. And we don't get into the war until 1917. So the war ends. A perfect example of a famous person involved with World War One. You have someone like Walt Disney. The war starts. He lies about his age. By the time he gets to France, the war's over. And to be honest, I think one of the most horrific things a U.S. general has ever done was done during World War One, when an hour before the armistice was to take effect, John Pershing launched an assault that resulted in more Americans dying than Germans. I am often a believer that World War One was just all a family feud that sadly went too far. Of my heritages, King Albert I of Belgium, I hold him very dear to my heart for his bravery that he didn't flee Belgium even with 75% of its country occupied. But the United States, I don't believe we really, it took a lot for us to get involved. The Lusitania attack, which ended up the German U-boat captain was right. We did hide supplies on that ship. And then even the Zimmerman telegraph, it took a lot for us to finally get involved. And then when Woodrow Wilson went to, and I'm not a fan of Woodrow Wilson, but when Woodrow Wilson went to the Versailles Treaty, his points, some were adopted, but then when he came back to the United States, our own country was like, we don't want to be involved in Europe. Okay, we went over to help them because the Germans attacked us, but we don't want to be involved in this. So I think C tier. I think it brought in a golden age, but also I think that kind of screwed us because that also will usher in the depression. So hands down. So World War II will begin in September of 1939 and end in April of 1945. But for us, as in the United States, it begins December 7th, 1940. Well, December 8th, the weekend after when Congress declared war. But it will go really... we enter... Because again, the whole mentality is we don't want to be involved. We don't want to see Americans dying for European war. But this is different. Because, and credit to FDR, because he did recognize this. The National Socialists were evil. What they were doing was completely evil. He wanted to go and help the British, because the British at this point, if you really think about it, they're on their own. Sure, you have the free governments in England with small detachments that are there, but England is fighting this war on their own, and yeah, the Soviets are fighting, but even the Soviets recognize that as a different war. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor was probably the happiest moment of Winston Churchill's life, to be completely honest, because that gave FDR the reason to declare war. Because of the Axis alliance, Germany now had to declare war on the United States, which meant we were able to go fight not only in the Pacific, but in Europe. And this war is so impactful in the United States because it is because of this war we become the global superpower. And at the end of the war, we begin the war. The global superpowers are technically England and France. Germany is trying to take that title. At the end of the war, the old empires of the world are finally done. England and France are now seen as subservient states to the United States. That's just the reality. The United States becomes the world power, and so does the Soviet Union. This is now the beginning of the Cold War. The Cold War, and this is what's going to be confusing because two of these wars are going to be connected. The Cold War begins 1945 and doesn't end until the 1990s. It does not end until the fall of the Red Curtain. I mean, the Iron Curtain. Well, it could be Red Curtain too. The Iron Curtain. Now, it's different in the fact that it's not a hot war, which there are hot wars in between. But it's, we have moments, and I like that it's Kennedy and Gorbachev, which thank God for those two, because had they not talked to each other, the world would have been destroyed during the Cuban Missile Crisis. So much happened, it's hard to even define. From Truman, when he found out the Soviets started making atomic bombs, all the way until Boris Yeltsin stood on the tank in Moscow. It was so important. This is where we'll see the space race. This is where we'll see the United States rise technologically. And to be honest, this kind of, and I don't want to say the United States is a nation in decline today, but with no competitor, we've just become the single superpower. Now, you could say China is rising to become the next superpower, but for, I would say, 20 years, the United States was unopposed to anyone. No one was like standing up to us and being like, no, you can't do that. We kind of controlled the status quo. And that's what makes that so influential on everything and impactful. All right, Korea. We're going to do Korea. Korea is fought June 25th, 1950, and ends July 27th, 1953, which technically no. The Korean War actually never really ended, so to speak. Pretty much what happened was they just agreed to stop fighting. That's the hot war. What ends up happening, I'm going to put it up at an A tier because this is what begins the proxy wars between Russia, the Soviet Union, and the United States. What you pretty much have happen is two separate republics are created in the Korea Peninsula following World War II. The North Republic is the People's Republic of Korea, which the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, which is a communist state. To the south, you have the Republic of Korea, which is a capitalist state. What happens is Kim Il-sung, that's his name, right? That's Kim Jong-un's grandfather. Yeah, Kim Il-sung. Kim Il-sung begins an offensive and attacks South Korea. They overrun the South Korean army. The United States gets involved, and by doing so, we send troops to go fight. We push them back all the way north of Pyongyang, which is the North Korean capital. But then Mao Zedong in China sends the People's Liberation Army, that's the Chinese army, he sends them across the Sino-Korean border in to fight us. And we actually fight Chinese troops. The United States did fight Chinese soldiers. We were actually a coalition army, so we fought side by side with the United Kingdom, Canada, Turkey, Australia, the Philippines, New Zealand, Thailand, Ethiopia, Greece, France, Colombia, Belgium, South Africa, Netherlands, and Luxembourg. That begins this era of proxy wars, so that's why I put it at A tier. Vietnam, I'm going to have to put a B tier, sadly. and that breaks my heart because I know many Vietnam veterans, and it just hurt. It breaks my heart because it was this war. Which let's get into the facts first. So November 1955 ends in April of 1975. The North Vietnamese had pretty much kicked France out. This is a reaction pretty much to Vietnam being under threat of becoming a socialist communist state. It kind of started under Eisenhower. The real hot war doesn't begin until LBJ, though, Lyndon B. Johnson. So let's discuss the strengths. The Vietnamese in 1967, their forces between the North Vietnamese, the Viet Cong, China, the Khmer Rouge, which that's a whole nother pack of things to unravel. Panthay Lao, Soviet Union, North Korea, somewhere near 860,000 soldiers. I'll say soldiers because there were women that fought in those armies. And now the coalition army, which is South Vietnam, the United States, the Khmer Rouge when it was on our side, South Korea, Thailand, Australia, New Zealand, Philippines, and Spain, which fascistic Spain, interesting. 1,420,000 soldiers. The war will end in a tactical withdrawal. The United States, it's very interesting because it's not an actually declared war like other wars. It was a police action. It was a 20-year police action like Afghanistan. It will end with the reunification of Vietnam under the communist regime. But ironically, they actually hated the Chinese and Russians just as much as the capitalist countries. So Vietnam to this day still is a communist nation, but it's actually very open to capitalist ideas. It's a very interesting situation. Our next two here are going to be the Gulf War and the War on Terror. I'm not going to get into those strictly because those are in our lifetimes. And, Vietnam and Korea debatably are too, but I remember the troops going into Iraq. I remember the troops going to Afghanistan. I don't remember the Gulf because I wasn't born yet, but, I have family members that remember, and I have family members who served. So I think we're just going to stop there. But, yeah, this is my list so far. So at S tier, we have the American Revolution, the Texas Revolution, the American Civil War, World War II, and the Cold War. At A tier, we have the westward expansion or Indian Wars. We have the Mexican-American War, and we have the Korean War. At B tier, we have the Spanish-American War. We have the Vietnam War. At C tier, we have the War of 1812 and World War I. And at D tier, we have the Barbary Wars. Now, the reason I don't really want to talk about the Barbary Wars, it pretty much was our reaction. We sent over the United States Marines and American Legion to stop the Barbary pirates. That's why in the Marine hymn, it's from the halls of Montezuma. That's about the Mexican-American War. And then it says to the shores of Tripoli. Tripoli was the capital of the Barbary states. And it's still the capital, I believe, of Algiers? No, Algiers is the capital of Algiers. It's in that region. But thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you guys enjoyed. I will be in Ireland at the time of this video, so thank you so much for your love and your support. If you want to continue helping the channel out, please try to subscribe to our Patreon. We have 5 tiers of subscription. We have the private, we have the captain, we have the sergeant, we have the colonel, and join this Imperial staff with the Marshal. Be my Marshal Nay. Also, please help our national parks with the History of Tim's National Park Preservation Fund. We love to help our parks. We know it's tough times, but the parks are suffering as well, because sadly, when times are tough, they are the first ones targeted. Thank you so much for joining us. If you enjoyed, please like, share, and comment. Please hit that red subscribe button. Hit the bell icon to be notified whenever we have content up. And with that, I will see y'all in the next one.